Salam everyone. Welcome to God's Level Earth, episode 4, The Sun's Path Explained, the East and the West. The prerequisite for this video is to make sure to watch episode 1 and episode 3 first, before watching episode 4, this episode. The typical response. Whenever presented with the idea of the Earth being flat, one of the main responses is that the Earth cannot be flat because the sun's motion would not work on a flat Earth. Such a statement breaches all 5 rules established in episode 1, and I will prove it. Breaches rule 2 and 5. Allah says, do not follow assumptions and guesswork, nor be influenced by what the majority believes. This statement is an assumption and guesswork based argument. It is assumed there is no explanation. It does not prove the earth is not flat. That would require you to look at the earth itself. Rule number 5. Do not hold on to that which you have no knowledge. The statement involves holding on to that which you have no knowledge. Not understanding how something could work or lacking an explanation for it does not mean it's not the truth. To prove the earth isn't flat would require you to directly measure and prove earth's curvature, not demand an explanation for every phenomena we observe. Furthermore, the Quran directly addresses and explains the sun and its motion and exposes the deception of the mainstream belief. Rejecting the clear verses about the true nature of the sun and its path breaches Rule 1, 3, and 4. Rule number 1. Do not follow and take the leaders of the great men of the disbelievers as a source of guidance/truth. Everyone's current understanding of how the sun moves in the sky comes from their leaders of the great men, NASA, government space agencies, etc. Rule number 3. Quran is to determine the truth from the falsehood, so we should not interpret the Quran based on external bias. People are interpreting the verses about the sun in the Quran to match the mainstream belief instead of studying the verses without any bias. Rule number 4. Put the Quran hadith above all other hadith. People are putting the external hadith about the sun over what the Quran is saying. Now let's get to the verses. What is the sun? Allah says in 10:5, He is the one who made the sun a light. The sun, so we know the sun is a light. In 71:16 he says, and he made the sun a lamp. The sun is a lamp as it produces light and also heat. What is the sun doing? And it is he who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon all in a circuit are floating, and subjected the sun and the moon each flowing for a specified term. And he subjected for you the sun and the moon persevering. The sun and moon by precise calculation. From these verses, we get the following information. The sun is in a circuit, floating. The sun is flowing for a specified term. The sun keeps moving, persevering. The sun's movement is precise, by precise calculation. What is the sun doing? 36:38. And the sun flows to a place of settlement for it. This is the determination of the exalted in might, the knowing. People think that this verse is talking about the sun flowing until the day of judgment. However, this cannot be the day of judgment, as on the day of judgment the sun is destroyed. Since the sun is described as something that is flowing to its place of settling, it would imply that the sun is still intact and functioning in some capacity. This interpretation does not align with the Quranic descriptions of the events of the day of judgment, where the sun is extinguished or destroyed. So if the verse says the sun flows to a place of settlement, can never be talking about what happens to the sun on the day of judgment, as on the day of judgment the sun is completely destroyed. Whereas this is saying the sun is flowing to a place of settlement, meaning the sun is still alive, functioning, and intact to some capacity. And we know from the previous verses I showed, Allah says that the sun is persevering and that it flows for a specified term. I'll explain later how the sun can be flowing continuously until the day of judgment, and at the same time flow to a place of settlement for it. And it is not appropriate for the sun to outrun, overtake, catch up, keep up to the moon. The sun cannot overtake or catch up to the moon. This is true because the sun can never overtake the moon because it moves slower in the sky. We know from observations that the moon moves faster than the sun, and the moon actually catches up to, overtakes, and outruns the sun. What is the purpose of the sun? And he has made the sun and the moon for calculation. That is the determination of the exalted in might, the knowing. One of the purposes of the sun is for calculation. Some calculations we can derive from the sun is we can tell the time of the year, it can tell you the time of day, it helps you with navigation, salah and glorification times within the religion, and other things. What is the path of the sun? The following verses will help us identify the sun's path and behavior. Is a circling sun Quranic? You can actually observe the sun circle in the north for a 24-hour period during some times of the year. And it is disputed whether you can or cannot in the south, but we'll get to that later in the video, inshallah. But does the Quran ever mention the circling sun? The story of the people of the cave describes a circling sun. If you read 18:17, it says, "And you would have seen the sun when it rose, curving, turning, passing over their cave to the right." You can see here the word, this Arabic word here means to inclinate, slant, bend, turn, twist, curve, curvature, curvedness, twisting, slope. So it has the curving, turning effect. So you would have seen the sun when it rose, curving, turning, passing over their cave to the right. So it was going to the right, meaning it actually came from the left. So the sun comes from the left and curves, turns, passes over their cave to the right. And when it set, cutting them to the left while they are in the opening of the cave. That is from the signs of Allah. From the perspective of inside the cave, you would have seen the sun rise, curving, bending, passing over their cave to the right. Step 2, the sun set to the left of the cave, cutting them, the sleepers, from the observer's perspective. So I've actually drawn it here. So see this thing here? Imagine the cave is here. Cave is here. The sun starts here. It says, and you would have seen the sun when it rose, curving, turning. So this is where the turning is. It was coming this way, turned this way, passing over their cave to the right. So it's telling you the sun is here, curving, turning, passing over their cave to the right. So it tells you the direction. Comes here, rises, curves, turns, bends to their cave, passing over their cave to the right. And when it set, it cut them to the left. So they're here, and then when it's going right, somehow sets to their left. So you can see here, imagine this is their cave, right? Usually when people experience sunrise and sunset, the sun will rise on one side and set on the other. So you would expect the verse to go something like this. You would have seen the sun pass them over their cave to the right and set to the right. Yet the verse is saying that it's curving, bending, passing over their cave to the right, yet somehow setting to the left. So it goes right, it rises to the right, it rises, passes over their cave to the right. So we can put it passes over their cave to the right, yet cuts them to the left. How is it rising from this direction, yet setting in this direction? The only way it would be possible is if it's a circling sun. Comes this way and then comes round back again. And then when you actually read the verse, it gives you the specific descriptive detail that says you would have seen the sun curving, turning, bending. So you would see this curving, turning, bending, passing over their cave to the right. And when it set, it cut them to the left. So you can see this word means to bend, to turn, to twist, to curve. So we go back to this slide. The story of the people of the cave describes the circling sun. It says, and you would have seen the sun when it was rising. So when the sun is rising, the sun is approaching you. It's getting closer to you. So it's at its furthest point and it's getting closer to you. So we start here. And you would have seen the sun when it rose, curving, turning, bending. This movement here. Curving when it was rising. Curving, turning, bending. Passing over their cave to the right. And when it set, and when it was setting, cutting them to the left while they in the opening of the cave. So if you're inside the cave and they're inside the cave, you're looking at them, past them, out into the open, you will see the sun curving, turning, bending, passing over their cave to the right. And when it's set, cutting them to the left. So your perspective, you will see the sun come left, like that, while they in the opening of the cave. Somehow the sun is passing over their cave to the right, yet cuts them to the left. When you would expect it to, if it's going right, you keep going right and disappear to the right. Yet somehow cuts them to the left. So the verse is describing a circling sun. And then it says, that is from the signs of Allah. Actually think about it. And you would have seen the sun when it rose, curving, turning, passing over their cave to the right, and when it set, cutting them to the left. That is from the signs of Allah. So Allah is describing the sign of the circling 24-hour sun. Allah did not leave out 24-hour sun from the book. He describes it as one of his signs. So you can actually watch videos of the sun circle the north. I'll play some one now, actually. So I have some footage from 24-hour sun in the north, and I'm going to read the verse as we're watching it to show that it's matching 24-hour sun observation in the north. However, I'm going to change some words. In the original verse, it says that the sun is curving, bending, passing over their cave to the right, and when it's set, cutting them to the left. I'm going to change the initial right to left and the second left to right, because this camera position is taken from a different perspective from the actual location of the people of the cave. And here's the video. So imagine this camera is set up inside the cave, looking out at the sun. So it says, and when it rose, so when the sun is rising, it's approaching you. So you're going to see that the sun is going to begin to rise. And it says, and you would have seen the sun when it rose, curving, bending, passing over their cave to the left. Originally is right, I've changed to left. And the next part I also changed, just remember. So I'm going to say left. It's actually right in the original verse, but that's due to perspective. But I'm going to read it how it's being observed from this perspective. And you would have seen the sun curving, bending, passing over their cave to the left. So watch as the sun rise. What's happening? Sun will begin to curve, bend, turn, and pass over their cave to the left. You're going to see what happens. It's going to curve, bend. Now it's over their cave. It's on top of them. Passing over their cave to the left. And now I have to go back to the start of the video. Now the sun is going to begin to set. So it starts here, curve, bends, passes over their cave to the left. And when it's set, you would have seen it cut them to the right. And when it's set, it's setting now. You would have seen it cut them to the right. You can see the sun is cutting them to the right. If they were lying here in the cave, you would see them. The sun would cut them to the right. And you would have seen the sun when it rose, curving, bending, turning, passing over their cave. You can see curving, bending, turning, passing over their cave. So it hasn't passed over yet. It's going to pass over soon. Curving, bending, turning, passing over their cave to the left, And when it's set, cutting them to the right. And that is from the signs of Allah. People think the purpose of this verse is to help us figure out the location of the cave. But you can never figure out from this verse where the cave is. But that's not its purpose. The purpose of the verse is to tell you about how from the cave you would have observed the circling sun. A circling sun, a 24-hour sun, is one of Allah's signs. And he tells us in this verse how it curves, bends, passes over their cave to the right, yet somehow cuts them to the left. It sets in the left, showing a circling sun. And this is one of Allah's signs. So the Quran mentions the circling sun as one of Allah's signs. It doesn't leave this detail out. So we know from the Quran that a 24-hour circling sun is a fact of reality. And we can observe this in the north. Many people can. Now we have the debate whether it also happens in the south, but we'll talk about that later in the video. What is the east and the west? 2:258. When said Abraham, "My Lord is the one who gives life and causes death," the man responded, "I give life and cause death." Abraham said, "Then indeed Allah brings the sun from the east, so you bring it from the west." So from this verse, we know that the direction that the sun rises is the east, and the direction that the sun sets is the west. Using the east and west description in the Quran, we can identify the path or circuit the sun is traveling. So Abraham says, then indeed my Lord brings up the sun from the east, so you bring it from the west. So we know that wherever the sun comes from, we call east, and wherever the sun sets, we call west. This is what these two Arabic words mean, Maghrib and Mashriq. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong. But the direction of the sun rises to the east. So my Lord brings the sun from the Mashriqi, so you bring it from the Maghrib. Basically, wherever the sun comes from is east, and wherever the sun goes is west. So when people are trying to figure out like what is the path of the sun, is it 24-hour sun in the north, is it 24-hour sun in the south, what is the sun's path? If we know that wherever the sun comes from is called east and wherever the sun goes to is called west, whenever the Quran talks about the east and the west, we can use what Allah says about east and west to figure out the sun's path. Because east is where the sun comes from and west is where the sun goes. So if you look at the descriptions of east and west, we know the path of the sun. How many easts and wests are there? In 70:40 it says, so I swear by the Lord of all the easts and all the wests that indeed we are able. The word for east and west in the verse is in plural form, meaning there are 3 or more easts and wests. So if you remember the previous slide, the sun comes from the east and then sets in the west. If there are 3 or more easts and wests, means we know that there are 3 or more directions that the sun will rise from and the sun will set in. So just by this verse alone, we can disprove the globe model as well as the AE typical flat earth model. It says, how many easts and wests? So I swear by the Lord of the easts and the wests that indeed we are able. So there are 3 or more, plural form. There are 3 or more rising easts and setting directions of the sun west. This debunks both models. So you can see the globe model, east is here and west is here. There's only one east and there's only one west. You can see clearly, west, east. Where's 3 or more? There's only one. This direction is east. Sun will come from this direction, anywhere on the globe, and set in this direction, anywhere on the globe. Same with the AE projection. The sun rises from this side and sets in the west. Follow my mouse. It goes like this. So there's only one east and one west. East on this side, west on this side. So this disproves both models. And we know from this verse that any model of the earth needs to have 3 or more easts and wests in order for us to consider it. So I swear by the Lord of the east and the west that indeed we're able. This verse states that Allah is the Lord of all the east and the west, 3 or more. Other verses in the Quran give details about the specific easts and wests. The 2 easts and wests. 55:17. He is the Lord of the 2 easts and the Lord of the 2 wests. The east and west in Arabic are in dual form, which indicates some similarity or parallelism between the 2 easts and the 2 wests. This is due to the use of the dual form represented by the suffix ain at the end of mashriqaini and maghribaini, west, which indicates 2 related or corresponding entities. This means that the 2 easts and 2 wests rise and set from different directions, however behave in a similar, identical fashion. The east and the west, 73:9. He is the Lord of the east and the west. There is no God except him, so take him as a guardian. This verse talks about a singular east and west, separate from the 2 easts and wests mentioned previously. The east and the west. This same east and west is mentioned by Moses, and he describes that he is also the Lord of that which is between them. 26:28. Moses said, Lord of the east and the west, and that which is between them, if you were to use reason. This informs us that the singular east and west have 2 ends, as that is only possible way to have a space between them. Now you're all probably a little bit confused, because earlier I showed that there were 3 or more easts and wests. This one says there are 2 easts and 2 wests, and this one says there is only one, or a singular east and west. You can see, Lord of all the easts and wests, 3 or more. He is the Lord of the 2 easts and the 2 wests. He is the Lord of the east and the west. So is there 3 or more, 2, or only 1? The answer is, you have to combine the verses so that they all connect together. So the east and the west breakdown. 70:40 tells you about all of them. It says, So I swear by the Lord of the east and the west, indeed that we are able. This means that as a general statement, there are 3 or more east and wests. These other verses talk about the specific east and west. So 70:40, so I swear by the Lord of the east and the west that indeed we are able, means there are 3 or more. 55:17 says, He is the Lord of the 2 east and the 2 wests. So these are 2 identical, similar east and wests. That's 2. And he is the Lord of the east and the west. There is no God except him, so take him as a guardian. 1 unique east and west. And you can see the other verse by Moses, 26:28, said, Lord of the east and the west, and that which is between them, if you were to use reason. So you can see how 2 plus 1 equals 3. 70:40 is telling you about all the east and west, 3 or more. These verses are talking about specific east and west. This one is talking about the 2 east and 2 west in dual form, meaning there are 2 east and 2 west that are identical and similar. This one is talking about a singular east and west, 1 unique east and west that has 2 ends, because he's the Lord of that which is between them. If you have a east and west that's a circle, at what point does the east start and what point does the east end? It doesn't make sense. It only works if there's a straight line east and west. So we have, he is the Lord of all the east and wests, 3 or more. He is the Lord of the 2 east and west, and he is the Lord of the east and west. 2 plus 1 equals 3. You can see how this verse is a general statement about all the east and west. This one is claiming he has ownership of 2 of them, and this one has claiming he has ownership of 1 of them. 2 plus 1 equals 3. So I've come up with this example to make it easier for everyone. So if I say I own 3 cars, and then I also say I own 2 blue cars, and then I also say I own 1 red car, did I lie? Well, in general, I own 3 cars. That's true. When I say I own 2 blue cars, that's true. But does that mean I only have 2 cars? No, because I also have 1 red car. So I own 3 cars, I own 2 blue cars, I own 1 red car. This statement is talking about all my cars. This statement is talking about 2 of my cars. And this statement is talking about 1 of my car. 2 plus 1 equals 3. Go back to the verse. Allah is the Lord of all the east and west, 3 or more. Allah is the Lord of 2 of the east and west. And Allah is the Lord of the east and the west. 2 plus 1 equals 3. 3 cars, 2 blue, 1 red. 3 or more east and west. 2 that are similar, identical, and 1 unique east and west. 2 plus 1 equals 3. So you can see how beautifully detailed the Quran is. Allah tells you here is the Lord of all of them, but then he tells you in these 2 verses about the specific easts and wests. 2 identical and similar in dual form. The reason he's mentioning the 2 east and the 2 west because they're identical and similar. And 1 unique one, and we know from Moses' story, is also the Lord in what is between them. So we know that it has 2 ends. The rising and setting place. So we're going to go through Dhul Qarnayn's story. 1883 says, and they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. Say, I'll recite to you about him our remembrance. Indeed, we established him in the earth, and we gave him of everything a course, or a means. So he followed a course until when he reached the setting place of the sun. So he reached the setting place of the sun. And he found it departing, emigrating in a muddy spring. So you can see the Arabic word here means to go away from, to depart without taking, to abandon, to forsake, to decamp, to depart, to go abroad, emigrate, leave one's country. So he found the sun departing, emigrating in a muddy spring. So it's bye-bye sun, departing, emigrating, going away into a muddy spring. So he followed a course until when he reached the setting place of the sun, and he found it departing, emigrating in a muddy spring. If you take its literal interpretation, it's saying Dhul Qarnayn reached the setting place of the sun, and he found it departing, emigrating into a muddy spring. So it's telling you that the sun has a setting place where it will depart, emigrate into a muddy spring. The literal interpretation means he reached the setting place and he saw the sun physically go into a muddy spring in a literal sense. Now, people will say, of course, that this is what he saw. It was an optical effect and he was just seeing a regular sunset. Let's debunk that idea. So these are the main arguments used to say this is an optical effect. Firstly, very few people are willing to accept a literal interpretation because they think it's impossible. That logic is silly because the Quran is meant to serve as a guidance. We should think, if Allah is being literal here, where could it possibly happen? And really think like in detail. Okay, let's say Allah is being literal here. It means he's correct. Allah doesn't make mistakes. So we got to figure out where could this happen? And you have to look harder than you've ever looked before. And people assume people can see it at all times. And I'm going to show you later that that is not true. But saying we can see it at all times, therefore it can't be literal, is not an argument against what Allah is literally saying. So in order to get away from what it's literally saying, you then have to come up with some excuses. So here are some excuses. Some people claim that Maghrib is used here as a time of sunset rather than the place. They are saying this because of the idea of Maghrib prayer. Essentially, they are saying he traveled a course until he reached the time of sunset. So he followed a course until when he reached, instead of the setting place of the sun, they want to put until when he reached the time of sunset of the sun. So he basically traveled until he reached the time of the sunset of the sun. Not the place, but rather he traveled until Maghrib time, basically. Maghrib in classical dictionaries does not mean time of sunset, but rather west or setting. However, in Islamic tradition, Maghrib is commonly used to refer to the Maghrib prayer, which is performed just after sunset, and it may indirectly relate to the time of day when this prayer occurs. So Maghrib is only used as a reference for Maghrib prayer according to Islamic tradition, not in the Quran. Maghrib is never used in the Quran to indicate a time, but rather a direction, the west, or it can mean to set in Arabic. You can see here the word Maghrib is never used for time. Just west. This is the verse we're contending. Setting place, west, 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 west. To set. Never used for time. So, understanding of the object of to reach. The verb here in Arabic means to reach, and it requires an object, something that is reached. The nature of the object determines whether reaching is spatial, a place, or temporal, a time. For example, if the object is a physical entity or place, it means reaching a location. He reached the city, he reached the river, these are locations. If the object is an abstract concept, it means reaching a stage or time. When he reached the age, a time. When he reached maturity, a stage. In Quran 4:6, the word for reach is used. Here it says, until when they reach the age of marriage, until when they reach nikah. So the word reach can be used for a time rather than a location, and use the context to figure out what is being referred to. So the verse says, until when he reached Maghriba. Quranically, Maghrib is never used to indicate a time. However, in order to know for certain if this is talking about a place or time, we need to look at the qualifier of the word Maghrib used in the verse. Qualifiers. Qualifiers in Arabic. In Arabic, a qualifier, a word that further defines or specifies the meaning of a noun, typically proves additional details about the noun it modifies. In this case, the qualifier is the sun. Setting, giving us more information about what kind of setting we are talking about. Let's look at the verse, 1886. Until when he reached the setting place of the sun. Maghrib by itself means setting or place of setting. However, you can see there is a qualifier after noun Maghrib, which is the sun. So until when he reached the setting place of the sun. Until when he reached the Maghrib of the sun. 1886. Until when he reached the setting place of the sun. Maghrib by itself means setting or place of setting. However, you can see there's a qualifier after noun Maghrib, which is the sun. Let me give you the explanation. The word Maghrib literally means setting or place of setting. In the verse, the Maghrib is described as belonging to the sun, indicating that it is the sun's Maghrib. He reached the sun's Maghrib. Until when he reached the Maghrib of the sun. Until when he reached the sun's Maghrib. The Maghrib of the sun, not Dhul Qarnayn's Maghrib. If we concede that Maghrib means to set, place of setting, or even when the sun sets, declines, as some people like to claim to make it a time based, then the verse is saying that Dhul Qarnayn reached the sun's Maghrib, not his Maghrib. The sun has its own Maghrib. This Maghrib, declining setting, belongs to the sun. So whether we say he reached the sun's setting place, indicated place, or he reached the sun's time of sunset, it doesn't change the fact it can never be Dhul Qarnayn's Maghrib. So even if we say it's time-based, the verse is saying the sun has a Maghrib, a time of sunset. When does the sun have its own time of sunset? It would only be possible if it literally sets, declines itself physically. So, until when he reached the Maghriba of the sun, the sun's Maghrib. Let's keep as a question mark. Explanation. The word Maghrib literally means setting or place of setting. In the verse, the Maghrib is described as belonging to the sun, indicating that it is the sun's Maghrib, not Dhul Qarnayn's. Therefore, the verse says he reached the sun's Maghrib, the place where the sun sets. If we consider Maghrib as a time of sunset, as some interpretations suggest, the verse still points to it being the sun's Maghrib, not Dhul Qarnayn's. So even if we interpret it as the sun's time of sunset, the verse still implies that the sun has its own Maghrib, a moment when it physically sets or declines. This interpretation would make sense only if we understand that the sun itself has a physical process of setting or declining, leading to the conclusion that the sun's Maghrib is an event associated with the sun's movement, not a time or event tied to Dhul Qarnayn. So it says, until when he reached the setting place, or we can even put time. Let's put time. Until when he reached the time of sunset of the sun's Maghrib. So Dhul Qarnayn traveled until he reached the setting place of the sun, or until the time of sunset of the sun's Maghrib. It doesn't say until he reached Maghrib. If it was talking about the time of sunset, then it would be his Maghrib. Until when he reached Maghrib, okay, Maghrib time. So he traveled until Maghrib. But it says until when he reached Maghrib of the sun. So until he reached the time of sunset of the sun. The Maghrib belongs to the sun. This verse tells us what happened at the place or during this time. So Dhul Qarnayn traveled until he reached the setting place of the sun or until the time of sunset of the sun. So the sun has a time where it sets. The sun has its own Maghrib. The sun's Maghrib. The verse tells us what happened at this place or during this time. And he found it departing, emigrating into a muddy spring. The verse tells us what he found at the sun's Maghrib. So whether you say Maghrib is time of sunset, it's still belonging to the sun. So the sun has its own Maghrib. The sun has its own time of sunset, meaning the sun has a time where it sets itself, its own Maghrib. Not you looking at it and you see it setting, but it's not really setting. The verse is saying the sun has a Maghrib. So the second excuse used to prove that this isn't literal is the word wajada is falsely translated as appeared as if, as well as people trying to imply that the find or the founding here is not a literal finding, more a something that he perceived or saw or appeared to him as if. When in fact the word to find means to discover something. So until when he reached the setting place of the sun and he found, discovered, it's basically you find something unexpectedly. Until when he found it, departing, emigrating into a muddy spring. So I'm going to play a video which disproves how wajada is not a appeared as if.
The first reason is Muslim scholars have an important rule in tafsir, or interpreting the Quran. The rule of thumb in understanding the meaning of any word in the Quran is by referring to the Quran itself. Al-Quran yufassar bil-Quran literally means the Quran is interpreted by the Quran. So if we want to really understand the meaning of the word wajadaha in this verse, we need to look at how the word was used and how it was meant in the rest of the story. Luckily for us, we don't need to look too far to find the same word repeated multiple times, for the word wajada was used twice in the same verse and 4 times in the story of Dhul Qarnayn. When you read verse 86 fully from the start to finish, you will see how the translators of the Quran deliberately forged the translation of the word wajada. The first time in the verse, the word wajada was translated as appeared to him. while the second time in the same verse it was translated as found. He literally found something. حتى إذا بلغ مغرب الشمس وجدها ووجد عندها قوما, until he reached the setting point of the sun, which appeared to him وجدها to be setting in a spring of murky waters, where he found wajada, found some people. This is the very same word in the very same verse, yet translated differently, simply because the second wajada in the same verse cannot mean it appeared to him that there were some people. No, he actually found some people in that place. More interestingly, just 4 verses later, Dhul Qarnayn encounters the sunrise, this time in verse 90. Almost identical wording to verse 86. Have a look on the screen. حتى إذا بلغ مطلع الشمس وجدها. This time the word وجدها was translated as he found it rising on people. Not it appeared to him to be rising on people. No, he literally found it rising on people. And again, 2 verses later, verse 93, Dhul Qarnayn reached a third place. And وجد من دونهما قوما. He found in front of them some people. Every single wajada in the Quran means found or found out. In fact, in the entire Quran, the word wajada, with all its variations, appeared 40 times. Every one of these, except that one, was translated as found or found out, never meant or translated as appeared to be. That's because the coherent use of the word wajada in the Quran means found, not appeared to be. To prove my point, when the Quran wanted to say something appeared to be while not really happening, it used a different word. When the Quran was telling the story of Moses and Pharaoh's magicians, in Surah number 20, verse 66, it said, and suddenly the ropes and staffs appeared to him as if by magic to be slithering. The word translated appeared to him is يُخَيَّلُ إِلَيْهِ. This word translated as appeared to him is يُخَيَّلُ إِلَيْهِ, not wajada. That's because خُيِّلَ إِلَيْهِ or يُخَيَّلُ إِلَيْهِ means appears or appeared to be when it is not really happening that way. While wajada means found something to be in real life as is. That's how coherent the Quran is in its usage of words and its meanings. Now, you coming today or any Muslim apologist trying to convince me that this one time the word wajada was used out of 40 other times, this one time, in this instance, the Quran meant the sun appeared to Dhul Qarnayn to be setting in muddy pool, but the Quran doesn't really mean that the sun sets in a muddy pool. That explanation is utter nonsense and doesn't even match the rest of the Quran itself or its linguistic coherence.
So if you read the verse again without any of the bull and any of the crap, it says, so he followed a course until when he reached the setting place of the sun, and he found it departing, emigrating into a muddy spring. Just read it as it is. It's pretty clear what it's saying. He reached the setting place of the sun, and he found it departing, emigrating into a muddy spring. So if you visualize that, the sun is literally, boom, going into it. And it's the setting place that he reached. Now, if we continue the verses, we get to the rising place of the sun. Now, there's a reason why Allah is talking about Dhul Qarnayn visiting these two locations. He's not simply saying, and he traveled until the sun set in a muddy spring. That's what he saw. And he traveled until the sun rose. There's a reason why Allah is describing these two locations. So it says, so then he followed a course until when he reached the starting point, beginning place. If you check the Arabic word here, it means commencement, onset, rise, dawn, first, prime, early stage, commencement, beginning, starting point, the start, first light of day, beginning, birth, front part, foremost. So until when he reached the commencement, start, beginning, starting point, beginning place, birth of the sun, he found it rising, coming suddenly, appearing, emerging over a community not we made for them against any shelter. The Arabic word here means to rise, ascend, to come to view, appear, show, become visible, erupt, come up, sprout, break forth, to go out, to come out, to emerge, to come suddenly. He found it rising, coming suddenly, appearing, emerging over a community not we made for them any shelter. So he followed a course until when he reached the starting point, beginning place of the sun, and he found it rising, coming suddenly, appearing, emerging over a community not we made for them, against it any shelter. You can see he reached the starting point of the sun, and he found it rising, coming suddenly, appearing, emerging over a community not we made for them, against any shelter. So this is a place where the sun will appear, come out of nowhere, rise, emerge. So the rising and the setting place. So if we take these two verses together, look at the information that we get. It says, the setting place. So he followed a course until when he reached the setting place of the sun. So the place where the sun will set. And he found it departing, emigrating in a muddy spring. So there's a place where the sun will set and where it will depart, emigrate, leave into a muddy spring. So there's a place where Dulkarnain went, called the Maghrib of the sun, the setting place of the sun, and he found the sun departing and emigrating into a muddy spring. The next place he went to, so he followed a course until when he reached the starting point, beginning place of the sun, and he found it rising, coming suddenly, appearing, emerging over a community not we made for them, against it any shelter. You can see he goes to the place where the sun departs and emigrates, and he goes to the place where the sun begins and starts. Thus and verily we encompass with him information. See, 1885 to 86, 1880 to 90. Then it says, thus and verily we encompass with him information. The last verse makes it clear that visiting these two places, he gained information and knowledge. Allah is informing us of these two places for a reason. He says he went to the setting place of the sun, where he saw it departing and emigrating to a muddy spring. He went to the beginning place of the sun, and he found it suddenly appearing, emerging over a community not he made for them, against any shelter. 1891 says, and thus and verily we encompassed with him information. So by him visiting these two places, he gained knowledge, he gained information. So if this was a literal place where the sun sets, disappears, emigrates into a muddy spring, another place where it emerges, begins, appears somewhere else, you can see how these two places, visiting these two places and witnessing this with his own eyes, is him encompassing information. So now that I've shown you the verses, the question is, what is the model? So now I'm going to show you a possible model that matches the verses to a high degree. It's one of the best flat earth models that I've seen that matches the verses and reality. So the model is called the dual pole model. It matches the Quran perfectly. So this is only for illustration purposes. The continent sizes and positions still need to be worked out. But you can see you have a 24-hour circling sun in the north and a 24-hour circling sun in the south. You can have transportation from South America to Australia. It's quite reasonable, especially with jet streams. The distance is not going around the entire world like the EU map. You can have a circling star rotation in the north, circling star rotation in the south, and the stars in the middle exactly what would be observed. You can have Aurelius Borealis in the north, Aurelius Borealis in the south, and it matches a magnetic field perfectly. You can see magnetic field here, and then the intersection line. So let me show you how the verses match this model. Let's start with the east and the west. Allah says, so I swear by the Lord of the east and the west, and that indeed we are able, meaning three or more. You can see there is one rotation here, one east and west here, one east and west here, and one east and west here. So there's three east and wests on the map. The sun will circle here, the sun will travel here, and the sun will circle here. That's three easts and wests. Now if we get to the specific ones, he is the Lord of the two easts and the Lord of the two wests. Two identical and similar east and west. You have an east and west here that has an identical partnering east and west down here. He is the Lord of the two easts and the two wests. The dual east and wests. One circling sun here, one circling sun here. And remember from the story of the people of the cave, a circling sun is a Quranic concept. So you have circling sun here, two easts and two wests. And he is the Lord of the east and the west. There is no God except him, so take him as a guardian. Then you have the singular east and west, which is this one here. And then Moses said, Lord of the east and the west, and that which is between them, if you were to use reason. So we know there is a unique east and west that has two ends. One end here, one end here. He's the Lord of the east and the west, and that which is between them. He is the Lord of the two easts and the two wests. East and two wests, similar in identical fashion. So we know Quranically there's only one sun. So the sun at one time of the year will be circling like this area here, and then the size will change. It'll get bigger. Basically, it circles this area, but the size of the circle is changing. Then it will keep circling and then keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then start traveling in a straight line like this on the equator. Boom. Then it will go off track and start circling like this, and then go in, and then go out, out. Sorry, this way, out, and then go back onto this track, going straight line on the equator, and then go off this way again. Start circling in, and then circle, out, and then go this way. So let's talk about the middle east and west, the singular east and west. So at one time of the year, during the equinox, the sun will travel on the equator in a straight line on this track. It'll go west off in this direction and then appear in the east. So it goes like this. Goes west, then boom, appears in the east. West, boom, appears in the east. West, boom, appears in the east. So this is the setting place here, and this is the rising place here. If we read it, it says, so he followed a course until when he reached the setting place of the sun, and he found it departing, emigrating into a muddy spring. So Dhul-Qarnayn went this way, went up this way, and he went in this direction, and he kept going and going and going until he reached the setting place of the sun, where he saw it set in a muddy spring. Now the rising place. So he followed a course until when he reached the starting point, beginning place of the sun, which is this place here. So then he went back this way, and he found the beginning, starting place of the sun, and he found it rising, coming suddenly, appearing, emerging over community, not we made for them, against it any shelter. So people think that if there was a place where the sun, quote unquote, teleports, then people would be able to witness it. What they're referring to is when the sun is on its circling the north track and circling the south track. During this circular motion, yes, everybody can see the sun somewhere in the sky. And during this track, yes, everybody can see the sun somewhere in the sky. The point where they can't is during the equinox, which happens about 2 times a year. The sun will travel this way, head west, and everybody on the coastline here, it will set for them. So everyone's on this side is going to see the sun set for them. And then everybody on this side is going to see the sun rise for them. So it goes this way, sets, disappears, and then begins to rise on this side. It's not in the sky. So when it goes west here, it sets for everyone along here. When it starts to rise, it's rising for everyone along here. So during this time in the north and this time in the south, yes, you can see it from 2 different points as being high above you in the sky. During the equinox, it goes west, it sets for everyone here, and then appears on the east and rises for everyone on the east. You can literally witness that during the equinox, the sun will travel in a completely straight line. So you can, if you're standing on the equator, you can see the sun rise from in front of you, if you're facing the sunrise, and you turn around, the sun will be setting directly behind you. So the sun travels along the equator in a completely straight line. So if the earth is flat and the sun is moving in a completely straight line towards the west, how does it ever end up on the east again if it's not turning like all the other times of the year? Because all the other times of the year it does circles. But during the equinox, the sun will travel in a completely straight line towards the west and end up on the other side on the east. The only way it works is if it teleports. The globe explanation is because the earth is a globe, and during the equinox, the sun is moving on the equator. Basically, Earth is just rotating and rotating and rotating and rotating and rotating, and the sun is moving along the equator due to Earth's rotation. But if you say the Earth is stationary and flat and that it's the sun that's moving, if the sun is moving in a straight line towards the west, how does it end up on the other side on the east? The only way is if it teleports. Now we get to the place of settlement, which is this middle path. It says, and the sun flows to a place of settlement for it. We know the sun is constantly moving from the other verses of the Quran, so the place of settlement is where the sun settles and travels in a straight line. For example, Allah tells us that He made the earth as a place of settlement. In the earth, we can move around. We're not fixed in a specific spot. In the same way, the place of settlement of the sun is the place where the sun settles by traveling in a straight line. This other times of the year, the sun is slowly increasing and decreasing the size of its circular path and constantly turning. It then flows to a place of settlement where it settles and travels in a completely straight line without any turning motion. So you can see here at this time of the year, the sun is turning and turning and getting smaller circles and then getting bigger and then getting bigger and bigger circles. The place of settlement is the sun will settle, but we know that it always moves. So the term settlement is talking about the fact that the sun begins to travel in a straight line. So it'll circle, 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 then get bigger, then settle and move in a completely straight line like this, and then come off the track and start circling again, and then turning and turning and turning and turning and turning, and then the turning gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Then it settles to its place of settlement and travels in a completely straight line. It goes forward, but it doesn't turn left or it doesn't turn right like other times of the year. It's place of settlement where it settles and travels in a completely straight line, then comes off the track and starts circling again and turning and turning and turning and doing bigger and bigger circles and smaller, etc. So the place of settlement, and the sun flows to a place of settlement, is this middle straight line, east and west, where it settles and travels in a straight line. Whereas other times of the year, it's constantly turning and changing the size of its circular path. Then it flows to its place of settlement in the middle, which is a straight line. I will now play a video which explains the path of the sun as viewed from the ground.
It feels weird to speak this way because it is unnatural. And this is because we do not feel any motion in regard to the earth. What we actually perceive with our own eyes is the sun changing its path in the sky throughout the year. So let's try and conceptualize what this obliquity of the ecliptic looks like here on Earth. And to do this, let's head over to the equator for the equinox. The sun hasn't risen yet, so let's expand our viewpoint in anticipation. What we see here when looking out at this expanded viewpoint is what is termed the celestial sphere. It is an abstract concept and, in the spherical Earth model, surrounds a spinning ball. Now, we can divide this celestial screen in half, and this is what is known as a celestial equator. And just like the geographic equator divides the north and south of our so-called planets in half equally, the celestial equator divides the sky. We are on the geographical equator at 0 degrees latitude, so it divides our sky screen here equally. Ah, here comes the sun. Watch closely. As you can see, when positioned on the equator during the equinox, the sun reaches its true zenith, which means it is directly overhead at 90 degrees. As you can also see, the sun travels the celestial equator here perfectly. It is currently 1 PM. It will continue to traverse the celestial equator until it sets. Now, let's rewind the sun to 1 PM and see what happens as we progress through the months of the year, keeping our time fixed at 1 PM. As you can see, the sun at 1 PM changes position. It weaves between the celestial equator like a serpent. As you can see, the celestial equator remains fixed here, but there is another line carrying the sun. This line is called the ecliptic. And as you can also see, the ecliptic has both northerly and southerly limitations. The sun does not track past this line to the north and this line to the south in its annual journey. These lines mark the tropic lines of latitude, Cancer and Capricorn, which form at 23.4 degrees north and south of the equator. If the ecliptic is the annual path of the Sun, then the obliquity is the northern and southern limitations of this path. There is no 23.4 degrees tilt of the Earth, but the Sun deviates 23.4 degrees either side of the celestial equator during its annual journey. I understand this is quite hard to visualize, so let's spend some more time on it. To conceptualize this, we will use 4 different points in the year: the equinoxes and the solstices. Here is the path of the Sun throughout the day at the equator during the spring equinox. And now the summer solstice. And the autumn equinox. And finally the winter solstice. As you can see, there are 2 forms of motion here in regard to the Sun. The first is a daily motion across the sky, and the second is the yearly drifting of this daily motion to the tropic lines of latitude and back. The annual drifting of the Sun to the tropic lines is the obliquity of its path. Let's now relocate to 50 degrees latitude in the northern hemisphere and see what this looks like from this location. This is the spring equinox. And now the summer solstice. The autumn equinox. And finally, again, the winter solstice. While it appears that the Sun's height is changing throughout the year, it is ultimately an optical illusion. For instance, during the solstices at 50 degrees latitude north, it appears that the Sun is higher in summer and lower in winter. But if we change our perspective to face southwest and combine the 2 images, you can see the Sun is not increasing and decreasing in height during its annual journey, but its location relative to the celestial equator changes. Therefore, it looks higher in the summer in the northern hemisphere as it is journeying the Tropic of Cancer, and therefore closer to those living in this location. And it looks lower in the winter as it journeys the Tropic of Capricorn as it is further away.
So this is the Sun and the lemma explained. So now I'm going to show you an animation of the Sun's movement over the projection. So this is during the equinox. You can see the Sun moves along the equator in a perfectly straight line from the east to the west. And as it approaches the west, it teleports from the west to the east. You can see clearly as well, day and night wrapping around each other, as explained in the previous video. So you'll see the night wrap around the day, and then the day wrap around the night, whilst the Sun is teleporting from west to east and moving along the equator in a straight line at its place of settlement. Now the video is showing 24-hour Sun in the north. You can see it circle the north, and you can see day and night wrap around each other. So here is 24-hour Sun in the south, and you can see day and night wrap around each other. So the video's already been like an hour long. So in my next video, I'm going to give proof that the sun teleports from the west to the east during the equinoxes when it's traveling in a straight line along the equator, inshallah. And as always, Allah knows best. Thanks for watching.